Pass McCain. Look at I Pass McCain right here. You're a rhino. You're a globalist. You're a globalist rhino. You're a globalist rhino. Hey, you're a globalist rhino.
That's Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw getting accosted by a member of the far right during the Texas Republican Party convention. Let's watch more.
I Pass McCain. I Pass McCain. I Pass McCain. You're a globalist rhino. You're a globalist rhino.
Things got pretty wild during the Texas Republican Party convention. In fact, Dan Crenshaw wasn't the only one who was accosted by the far right. Stick around for the second individual, which we'll talk about in just a bit. But in that video, you can also hear an unknown person shouting, Dan Crenshaw is a traitor. He needs to be hung for treason, which tends to be the method of violence favored by the far right in America. If you can recall, they also wanted to hang Mike Pence for not unilaterally deciding the presidential election on behalf of Donald Trump. But the person shouting, who was that lunatic? Allegedly a member of the Proud Boys, and Crenshaw's manager was also shoved into a pillar, and several people were hit with cameras during that whole kerfuffle. Later, Dan Crenshaw responded on Twitter saying, this is what happens when angry little boys like Alex Stein don't grow up and can't get girlfriends. And that was the individual who was shouting at Dan Crenshaw in the video that you watched. But Emma, I just think it's amazing to see Republican lawmakers who in a lot of ways enabled the right wing, pandered to the right wing, like the extreme right wing in America, now seeing that chickens do in fact come home to roost, and they're a little upset about it. They don't know what to do.
Yeah, that was gonna be the phrase that I used, right? I mean, and someone, that famous tweet is going around. The supporter of the leopards eating faces party is shocked and chagrined and crying when her face gets eaten by a leopard. I mean, that's the case, right? This is the monster that the Republican Party has created. In our coverage on the Majority Report of the January 6 hearings, we've focused on, yes, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers. They are terrifying groups, but they do not exist outside of the fact that the right wing and the Republican Party and Donald Trump have been stoking this kind of right-wing militia attitude for decades at this point, because they think it's politically beneficial to them, up to a point. But the thing about a cult of personality that they've created with Donald Trump is that there's everybody except him can't fit into the purity test or pass the purity test that they've created, which is that if you did not support Donald Trump fully in his efforts to overturn the election, if you were even mildly critical of Donald Trump in his efforts to overturn the election, hey, we're coming for you. And frankly, that's basically the only good thing that the Democrats have going into the midterms in 2022.
That's why they've focused on the January 6 hearing so intently, because I think that is what their campaign platform is going to be focusing on. I think that's the main issue that they're going to use to both fundraise and campaign, because what else would they use for their campaigning purposes? But aside from that, you make a really good point in that, the Republican base has really become the MAGA party, the Trump party, as opposed to a group of voters who have principled views on policies. Politics has really devolved into cult of personalities. It's devolved into like WWE type political rallies for the right wing. And so anyone who goes against Trump, as you mentioned, is gonna be targeted, much like what you experienced in that video with Dan Crenshaw. However, one person who certainly did enable Donald Trump, one person who in fact voted against certifying the election after the riots took place on January 6th, was Senator Ted Cruz. And guess what? He got targeted during this convention as well. Let's take a look.
Remember how Trump made fun of your wife and then you go become best friends with Trump? I know, but why do you do that? You go become best friends with Trump after he makes fun of you and your wife. Why do you do that?
I understand you don't want to defend Texas and you don't want to.
No, see, I do love America. See, you don't. You care more about the border between Ukraine and Russia than you care about the border between Texas and Mexico. Why is that? Why do you care about that?
God bless you.
I know, but why are you a globalist? You're a globalist, bud. You know it, Ted. Hey, Teddy, you're a globalist. You're a globalist, Ted. You know that, bud. And that's why you're a coward and a liar. And you know that, and I know that, and that's why you're afraid to stand up for it. When people were freezing and dying, you were in Cancun, Mexico. You remember that? You remember when you're at the all-inclusive buffet when people were freezing? No, but do you remember that, Ted, when everybody was freezing? Remember that, when people were dying? What were you doing? Yeah.
Emma, really interesting to see that Ted Cruz is, I mean, like the very end of that video, look, the guy's far right. I disagree with him. Obviously, he wants more of a focus on persecuting asylum seekers at the border. But aside from that, the very last part of his statements there were true. I mean, Ted Cruz did abandon his own constituents during a severe winter storm where hundreds of people died, where their electric grid failed because it's privatized and deregulated. All of that is true. But I just love seeing Trump's number one panderers, okay, number one panda bear, noticing like, oh man, this bed that I made for myself is actually really, really uncomfortable. But sorry, I mean, this is what people like Ted Cruz have not only enabled, have encouraged actively on a regular basis for their own political purposes.
Yeah, the MAGA thread count, the MAGA sheet thread count is like -5, right? It is not a comfortable bed.
Those polyester sheets, man, super cheap. You're gonna be sweating. You're gonna be sweating, but that's the bed you made, Ted Cruz.
Oh yeah. And the American flag print is like melting off and getting on your skin. It's just like, Jesus, why is this so cheap? Yeah, no, I love seeing it. I mean, I do, even though, of course, the globalist tag that they're assigning to him is an anti-Semitic dog whistle. That is a way for people to say it's the Jews without saying it's the Jews, or if you're not a Jew, you're in bed with the Jews. So this is the lovely base that the right has fostered, created, and it ends up turning on them. Do I think that this is going to be enough to hurt Ted Cruz in his next election, which I believe is in 2024? Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm just trying to remember because 2018 was when he went up against Beto O'Rourke. But yeah, so I don't know if he will face consequences for that. But it is still helpful to see, I think, for the general public that the right is eating its own in this way, because it doesn't really. Again, in a cult of personality, it doesn't matter how much you capitulate to that base, how much you give them the racism that they desire. Ted Cruz has been as conservative, as racist, as extreme as you can possibly get in the Senate. And it's never gonna be enough because people who are bigoted will always find a new scapegoat, even if you crack down really hard. People who want to see another group blamed for their problems and who hate that group, they will keep hating. It just continues to eat itself. So they always have to find a new target. And right now it's Ted Cruz.
Look, I hate what it means for the country because the last thing we need is for the Republican Party to learn all the wrong lessons from this and start pandering even harder to the extreme elements of their party. But at the same time, I do enjoy watching Republican lawmakers, particularly people like Ted Cruz, reaping what they sow. So we'll see how they're gonna try to maneuver and handle this. Knowing Ted Cruz and how much of a coward he is, he's probably likely to pander to them more, but hopefully you'll have, I mean, I don't even know. It's kind of like a fruitless effort at this point. You have Republican leadership like Mitch McConnell trying to find ways to kind of purge the party of these elements. But you can't do that when the majority of the GOP electorate supports the far right. I mean, this is who they are. It has become the Trump party. They've become the party that gets galvanized by really nothing more than identity politics, right? Anti-trans people, anti-LGBTQ people, anti-immigrants, anti-Black people, like the list goes on and on. That is what they're empowered by, emboldened by, that is their political messaging. The mainstream Republican Party has leaned into that greatly, and that's part of this as well. That's part of what's enabling the extreme elements of their party as well. It's both terrifying, but also not surprising at all.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.